A man is running through the woods. His heart is racing. He stumbles over the forest floor. Someone is chasing him. He stops for a second to catch his breath. "Don't move," a voice shouts. A gun is aimed right at him. But the man doesn't wait. He ducks and keeps running, weaving through the trees, trying to shake the pursuer. A shot rings out. It hits. He stumbles but keeps moving. Another shot echoes through the forest. His name is David Sweat. Along with another inmate, he managed to execute one of the most infamous prison escapes in US history. How did they do it? Clinton Correctional Facility, often called Dannemora Prison, is a maximum security prison in New York that houses some of the most dangerous and violent criminals, murderers, gang members, and violent offenders. Among them, there was an inmate by the name of Richard W. Matt. The 48-year-old Richard Matt was a ruthless career criminal. He once kidnapped his former boss, locked him in the trunk of a car, and drove around for over a day, stopping now and then to beat and torture him in an attempt to extort money from him. When that failed, he killed him, cut up the body with a hacksaw, and dumped the remains in the Niagara River. He was convicted in June 2008 and sentenced to 25 years to life. He was later transferred to Dannemora, where he would spend the rest of his days. Matt, however, had other plans. He had been trapped between these walls for 7 years, and he desperately wants out. Luck would be on his side, for the cell next to him housed an inmate named David Sweat. Sweat had been in Dannemora for more than 12 years, but he was in and out of prison most of his life. In 2003, he was sentenced to life in prison for brutally murdering a deputy sheriff by shooting him 22 times. He also happened to be Matt's neighbor in the cell block. Both inmates are united by crime and a desire to escape this confinement, so the two decide to work together. Despite their criminal records, the two were in the honor block, a section for well-behaved inmates, which meant they were given more privileges and more freedom in prison, as well as avoiding any suspicion due to their good behavior. Despite being a convicted felon, Matt was charismatic, the kind of guy who could charm his way into or out of almost anything. Sweat, however, was more the quieter type, more calculating, more cunning and skilled with his hands. Throughout his years in prison, he picked up a lot of skills, from painting to woodworking and even working as an electrician's assistant, so he was a crucial part of their escape. They started searching for a weakness, and what they came up with was a simple but solid plan that could work. They were going to unscrew their cell door locks, climb out of the cell block to the yard, and climb over the massive perimeter wall. But the first step is to remove the lock. To do that, they need a specific screwdriver bit, a type known as a Torx, but they didn't have access to any tools. They needed someone from the outside who can get them what they need. Being part of the honor block, the two had more freedom and access to the facility's workshops, so they landed jobs at the tailor shop in hopes of acquiring tools. Richard Matt, always looking for potential recruits, noticed that their instructor, a civilian named Joyce Mitchell, had a thing for David Sweat. After someone complained, Sweat was removed. That's when Richard jumped in using Sweat. He worked as a middleman and he manipulated her so she'd become their external accomplice, to secure her as a helping hand. But he didn't ask for a screw bit right away. He wanted first to have some leverage. He exploited her interest in Sweat and asked for inappropriate photographs of her. He planned to use them as blackmail just in case she didn't cooperate. Also, if she planned to double-cross him, he would remind her that they will go down together. Somehow, Joyce provided the photographs, and throughout the span of a few months, he started asking for more and more stuff, until one day he asked her for the Torx bit. This was a bad idea because David Sweat could not dismantle the cell door lock. Sweat grew desperate after the failed attempt. Therefore, he started looking everywhere for an exit. The solution was closer than he thought. He noticed the vent behind his bed. Inside, David heard consistent steam pipes, clanking noises coming out from behind his cell wall. If he could cut around the vent, he could access the catwalk and perhaps to freedom. And so Plan B was set into motion. To cut the steel and chip away at the thin wall layer, they needed hacksaws and chisels. As expected, Joyce Mitchell was their resource provider in prison, but the required tools this time were on a bigger scale compared to the previous attempt. However, she managed to find a way, by stuffing chisels and hacksaw blades in hamburger meat that would be frozen. After that, she'd pack it in a bag and deliver it with a fourth accomplice, Gene Palmer. Gene Palmer was a corrections officer at the facility. Although he had no idea the two were planning an escape, he unknowingly played a role in helping them. He often delivered art supplies to David Sweat in exchange for paintings. Joyce Mitchell exploited this routine by hiding tools in packages passed through Palmer, disguised as frozen meat or food deliveries. With the proper tools at hand, Sweat and Matt began digging their way out from under their beds. Every evening from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. they worked tirelessly, making turns as one would cut while the other kept watch for officers. Using crude tools, they chipped through the back walls of their cells and carved out openings about the size of an air vent. By March 2015, the holes were complete, and to avoid detection during checkups, they disguised them with tape and paint. From there, they slipped into the maintenance area's catwalk. Now they needed time to study the space, learn the layout, and prepare before they could step outside. First, at Matt's request, Mitchell purchased 2 pairs of lighted reading glasses. Supposedly, they were for him and Sweat to read and paint at night, but in reality, they used them as a light source while moving through the catwalk. It made it much easier to explore the area and draw diagrams. They explored it for weeks, eventually reaching a locked steel grate. But the gate was too sturdy and too thick to cut through without making a lot of noise. That's when they decided to cut through the prison heating pipes. The pipe was usually steaming hot, but in early June it was off for the summer. It was big enough for someone to crawl through, but more importantly, much easier to cut through. Every night, like clockwork, Sweat would crawl to the pipe and start sawing. It took a few weeks, but the process was swift as they didn't have to worry too much about noise or guard watching. Speaking of guards, particularly nightly checkups, protocols show that officers were expected to conduct master head counts at least 4 times each night. But this was the honor block. In this unit, the checks were far more relaxed. During their planning of the escape, Sweat managed to leave his cell at least 85 times. The official report from the Inspector General points out that if only one of more than 400 required checks were properly performed during the time Sweat was out of the cell, the escape would have been instantly foiled. Sweat kept going further until he located a manhole cover, climbing up the ladder and popping up the lid. He found himself outside the prison walls, finally able to breathe the air of freedom. But he knew this wasn't the right time. He had to pick the best moment. He also needed an escape driver. You see, he was meticulous. He thought of everything and planned ahead what he would do beforehand. Joyce returned to the picture and convinced her to be their escape driver. He agreed to meet the two on June 5th, the day of their escape, by parking the car exactly above the manhole. Then the two would come up with her and help her get rid of her husband. Sweat thought he had thought of everything. They had the timing, the getaway car, and a plan for where to go. He even packed extra tools, food, and civilian clothes, all hidden in a guitar case. Later, he mentioned that he chose a guitar case because it made anyone seem less suspicious. As a final touch, they left notes scattered along the escape route, in their cells near the pipe. On Friday night, June 5th, 2015, the awaited day finally arrived. The prison was quiet as usual. Matt and Sweat packed everything they needed and left decoys in their beds made from clothes and bed sheets, hoping to fool the guards during the nightly checks. At around 11 p.m., they slipped behind their bunks and entered the maintenance area. The entire journey from their cells to the manhole cover took about 20 to 30 minutes. They had to squeeze through tight spaces and navigate the complex network of the prison's infrastructure, including climbing over and under pipes, descending ladders, and even chiseling through a brick wall. Eventually, they reached the now infamous steam pipe, crawled through it, and climbed a final ladder that led to the manhole outside the prison walls. They lifted the lid feeling that nightly breeze, but unfortunately that came with a wave of disappointment. They kept looking around for Joyce, but there was nobody waiting for them. Unbeknownst to them, she had cold feet and backed down at the last minute. She checked herself into a hospital for a panic attack. With no other choice but to continue on foot, they headed for the surrounding mountains, thinking they would be able to disappear in the dense forest of upstate New York. The next day, prison guards discovered the escapees, triggering a massive nationwide manhunt to catch the two dangerous murderers. Authorities offered a reward of $100,000 for any information leading to their capture. More than 15,000 law enforcement officials, including local and state police, FBI, and ATF agents, forest rangers, and marshals, all assisted in the search. Also, giving the proximity to Canada Border Patrol agents played a huge role in the manhunt. The search continued for nearly 3 weeks, before Richard Matt was spotted 50 miles away in Franklin County, New York on June 26th. After he fired a shotgun that he stole from a hunting camp, search parties were alerted to his presence. Matt did not want to go back to his cell, so he raised his gun, leaving the officer no choice but to shoot. They later found out that the gun was empty. As his daughter later said, he chose death by a cop. 2 days later, on June 28th, David Sweat was found by an officer near the Canadian border. David refused to stop after an officer yelled for him to surrender, so he shot him 2 times in the torso, but he survived, and with that, the 23-day manhunt was over. David Sweat pleaded guilty for what he did and was sentenced back to prison with more time on top of his life sentence. During the interrogation, he gave detailed records of the prison escape, the tools used and how they acquired them, and the fact that they did all the heavy work, whereas Richard Matt was not physically capable of doing so. He even stated, "Shawshank ain't got shit on me," belittling the story of the movie that partially inspired this escape, seeing how he managed to do a similar escape in a short period of time. Joyce Mitchell and Gene Palmer also pleaded guilty for their roles in the escape and were sentenced to 7 years and 6 months in jail respectively. As of the time of writing, David Sweat, now 44 years old, is incarcerated at Mid-State Correctional Facility in Marcy, New York.